The threat of violence hangs over the cenotaph and London today and tomorrow, and that threat is very much something that has been stirred up by our Home Secretary, the person who is supposed to unite the country and to ensure that we have peace and tranquility in our day-to-day life. That's why she's in charge of the police. And the Prime Minister today has now had to come in and again reassure the country after the way Suella Braverman has whipped the emotions up. The cenotaph is under a 24-hour guard, I think for the first time in history. And 500,000 people are coming into London, pro-Palestinian supporters. Indeed, Palestine needs this. You know, if you go back to the beginning of this siege, go back slightly after the October the 7th atrocity, and to President Herzog's statement that all Palestinians share responsibility for that atrocity. That is a shocking statement that effectively endorses or confirms the idea of collective responsibility, which is heinous, which is against the almost every agreement that's been put in place since the Second World War. And then you come to the bombardment, the siege, the hourly attacks by the Israeli Air Force. All of this is shameful, and the commands that Israel has made of people in Gaza to move to the south, where they were again bombed. There's every reason to support Palestine. There's every reason to call for peace. The call for a ceasefire is a call for a very specific action, which may be at times a part of the process towards peace, but it is a specific action that is not always part of the process toward peace. That, I think, is foolish. People have bought into a specific interpretation to solve the problem rather than looking at the problem itself. A call for peace, a demand for peace, is what everybody should ask for. In the same way, in the calls for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Peace. But at the same time, a nation has a right to defend itself, and we should help Zelensky defend itself. Israel has a right to defend itself, and we should help Israel defend itself, but not, I think, by laying siege and bombarding 2 million innocent civilians, whether President Herzog defines them as combatants or not. And I think the majority of the world and the majority of Israel do not agree with what President Herzog said. And indeed, I think there's been a certain amount of pullback from that statement. I think probably he wishes he never said it. So there is every reason to proclaim support for Palestine and for Palestinians, whether they're in the West Bank, suffering from the aggressive encroachment of settlers, or whether they're in Gaza, suffering from the siege of Netanyahu's Likud-inspired government. But at the same time, there is no reason to call for the eradication of Israel, no reason to call for any form of anti-Semitic agitation, and no reason to be waving the flags of the Qasim Brigade or the sort of flags that you see behind pictures of Osama bin Laden. And yet all of these are visible, along with the stupidity of calling for jihad, something that most people have no understanding of what they're talking about. And the sloganizing, I think, anyway, it's the sloganizing which got President Herzog into trouble. It's the sloganizing which gets those aggressive groups into trouble on whatever side they are. What we need to do is to call for peace, for dialogue, and for conversation, for talking. Jaw, jaw, not war, war in the language of Churchill. That's a slogan, I suppose, or at least an idiom, or at least words. But words are good. Walking down a street, chanting slogans, that day has gone, I'm afraid. That day has gone. When you are kettled by a group of police, when your action is contained, it is no longer an action. It is an indulgence to the concept of freedom, but it has been subverted by the authorities. It's not the Jarrow March. This is not even the march to support fox hunting, one of the biggest marches in London, and it still had no effect. The way to deal with politics now, I think, is to use social media and to use debate. And heaven knows we have more facilities to do so. The march, the slogan, the petition, these are things of the 19th century and the early 20th century, and they worked in the past. And I certainly don't want to stop people benefiting from the other values of the march, the petition, the slogan, which is the sense of camaraderie that they engender. But I don't think these things any longer have the power to change the mind of intransigent politicians. They just get more and more crazy, as we saw in the last week from the pouting and the stamping of Suella Braverman. I've seen more sense from a 3-year-old. But this is a 3-year-old with almost absolute power. And she needs putting in the nursery and being taught that this is not the way to behave. She needs to be corrected or dismissed. And we shall see in the next few days what happens to her. In the meantime, we're in a situation where we have a national holding of breath and hoping that this is not going to be a disastrous period. I hope not. I hope not. But the seeds of chaos have been sown, not by the people marching, not by the police, but by the one person who we're supposed to rely upon to ensure security in our country, and that is the Home Secretary. And she's defended by people in GB News and people in the right wing of the Conservative Party by saying all she is doing is saying what other people, what real people, what the majority of people think. That's not her job. That's the job of a newspaper. That's not the job of the Home Secretary. The job of the Home Secretary is not to say what we think. The job of the Home Secretary is to control how people behave, not what we think. We can think for ourselves and we can articulate that perfectly well, perfectly soundly, in social media, in letters to the Times, in our own opinion pieces in newspapers. We don't need the help of the Home Secretary to articulate our views, for goodness sake.